Melania Trump tried to tear Jasmine Crockett down, but Jasmine hit back with one move that turned the whole room upside down. The mother Melania mocked as a nobody turned out to be a national hero, the woman who kept America's flag from falling. What shocking proof crushed Melania's pride on live TV. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The moment hung in the air from the last sentence, then the lights hit like lightning. The hearing room blazed under dozens of cameras, every flash cutting through the silence. The air felt thick metallic, almost vibrating with pressure. Millions of Americans sat frozen before their screens, watching as history sharpened its blade. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, her posture unbreakable, her eyes cold but filled with pride, the kind of calm that comes right before impact. Across from her, Melania Trump didn't flinch. Her face was carved in ice, her lips curling into a faint knowing smile that carried both confidence and contempt. No one spoke. Even the reporter stopped breathing. The sound of a single pen tapping against the desk echoed through the chamber, sharp, deliberate, final. It was more than noise, it was a signal. The silence shattered. The battle had begun. The silence from before didn't last long. It shattered when Melania leaned forward, voice calm, eyes gleaming like polished glass. Capitol has hundreds of cleaning staff, she said, her tone light but soaked in venom. No one remembers their names. Your mother, Ms. Crockett, was just one of them. The words fell like acid. A few gasps rippled across the hearing room, but Melania didn't flinch. She gave a soft, arrogant laugh, quiet, slow cutting. It wasn't the sound of humor. It was the sound of superiority. Even the air seemed to freeze around it. The camera zoomed in, catching every shift in expression, every twitch of control breaking. For a moment, it felt like the world stopped breathing. Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes were calm, almost too calm, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Slowly, she stood her chair, sliding back with a sharp scrape that echoed like a warning shot. One hand rested on the thick folder before her, not just papers, but something far heavier. Her other hand pressed the table, steady and deliberate. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, restrained, but filled with a quiet force that demanded attention. Mrs. Trump, Jasmine said, every syllable crisp, let me remind you of something about what you call nameless. A young staffer, sensing what was coming, hurried to the control panel. The lights dimmed slightly, the hum of equipment filling the silence. The large screen behind the witness table flickered to life. At first it showed static, then slowly the image sharpened. A black and white photograph appeared, dated 1976. It showed a group of women, black women, standing shoulder to shoulder on a wide field, their hands gripping thick ropes attached to a massive American flag billowing in the wind. Their expressions were fierce, focused, determined. They weren't posing. They were fighting the wind, holding the flag steady as the nation celebrated 200 years of independence. The photo was raw, real, and hauntingly beautiful. And then the camera zoomed into the center. There, right in the middle, was Jasmine's mother. Her face young, her eyes narrowed against the wind. Her arms strained, muscles tight, both hands gripping the thick rope as if her life depended on it. The veins in her hands stood out. Her knuckles were white from effort. Sweat streaked down her temples, but her stance didn't waver. It was the kind of strength that doesn't ask for recognition, the strength that simply holds the flag upright when others can't. The room erupted in whispers. A journalist gasped, "Oh my God." Another leaned forward, snapping photo after photo of the screen. "That's her," someone whispered. "That's Jasmine Crockett's mother." The realization rippled outward like a shockwave. Some of the older senators who had lived through that year suddenly went pale. They remembered the image vaguely from old newspapers, but never knew who the woman was. Now the truth was standing before them, her daughter carrying the same fire in her eyes. Melania's smile cracked. Her lips trembled just slightly enough for the cameras to catch it. Her hand fidgeted with a piece of paper that no longer mattered. The confidence, the icy calm that defined her began to crumble under the weight of history staring down at her. She looked at the screen, at the young woman gripping that rope, and for the first time she had no words. Jasmine didn't rush. She didn't gloat. She took one slow breath, stepped closer to the microphone, and said clearly, "The woman you insulted was the one who held America's flag upright on that day. She is not nameless. She is this country's legacy." The words landed like thunder. Reporters froze mid-sentence. The audience at home went silent. Cameras kept clicking one after another, each flash sealing the moment into history. On the giant screen, Jasmine's mother stood immortal, a woman of strength, not status, holding the symbol of a nation with nothing but her bare hands. Melania lowered her gaze. Her smile was gone. The chamber pulsed with something that wasn't just tension anymore. It was justice, quiet and undeniable. And across America, millions watched as the balance of power shifted, not with shouting, not with politics, but with a single photograph that spoke louder than any speech ever could. The last flash still burned on the screen when Melania straightened, forcing composure back into her face. She leaned toward the mic, voice cool but brittle, and struck back. She said, "A photo, anyone can fake it. It proves nothing." The bravado cracked at the edges. Her voice trembled and her eyes kept sliding away from the screen. Reporters froze mid-scribble, cameras held their zoom, and the room listened to that wobble like a siren. Across the country, living rooms went silent. Millions of viewers leaned forward, hearts ticking like metronomes. In the chamber, the air seemed thinner, as if every breath had to earn permission, as if sound itself feared crossing the line. Even the walls listened hard. Melania stared down at her notes, but the lines refused to hold still, and the confidence that carried her in wavered like heat over asphalt. Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. She let the photograph breathe until the room felt the weight of it pressing against their rib cages. Everyone knew what the question was, and it rose like a drum roll across the nation. What will Jasmine unveil next to answer that challenge? The tension from Melania's last words still hung in the air when the committee chair leaned forward, tapping the gavel once. His voice broke through the silence. "We need verified evidence." The cameras tightened on Jasmine. The lights felt hotter, sharper. Slowly she rose from her seat again. This time her presence filled the entire room. Her tone was cold, clean, and cutting. "Mrs. Trump, you want proof," she said, eyes locked on Melania. "Here it is, the official history of the United States." She lifted a folder stamped with the seal of the National Archives and Records Administration. The clerk moved quickly, handing copies to the panel. The pages bore the title Bicentennial Exhibit, 1976 Official Personnel Record. Jasmine flipped to a section marked in yellow. There it was, a printed list of staff recognized for their participation. Near the top, the name Sarah Crockett. The sound of camera shutters filled the room like gunfire. A murmur rose among the lawmakers. Even the chair's pen froze midair. Melania's expression hardened, but her eyes betrayed her, flicking nervously between the page and the screen that still displayed the photo of that day. Jasmine placed the record on the table with precision, the sound echoing like a verdict. "This document," she said evenly, "confirms the photo is authentic and archived as part of our bicentennial collection. The woman you called nameless was written into history before your words tried to erase her." The crowd stirred. Phones buzzed. Someone whispered, "She actually found it." Then came the next voice, calm, deep, and commanding. The moderator nodded toward the witness table, where Dr. Richard Ellison, a noted American historian, adjusted his glasses and stood. His voice filled the chamber with authority. "If not for the women in that photograph," he said, slow and deliberate, "the flag would have fallen in the windstorm that day. America would have remembered July 4th, 1976, not as a celebration, but as a national embarrassment." His words rolled through the room like thunder. Every sentence carried weight, academic, moral, historical. The audience erupted. The sound was chaos and awe all at once, reporters whispering, senators exchanging looks, camera crews whispering, "We've got the shot." The chair tried to gavel for order, but no one was listening anymore. The truth had broken loose, and it was louder than the rules of decorum. The cameras turned back to Melania. Her face glistened under the heat of the lights. A thin sheen of sweat crept down her temples, smudging the perfect edge of her makeup. She blinked, her composure unraveling with every flash. Jasmine leaned closer to her microphone, her voice lowering into a whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. "The mother you called small," she said, her tone steady, as steel as the woman who kept that flag from falling. Melania didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the table. Around her, the evidence lay open, the photo still glowing behind her, and the name Sarah Crockett printed in ink that history itself could never erase. And in that silence, after Jasmine's words, every viewer in the room and across America knew the tide had turned. The last echo of Jasmine's words still lingered when the room erupted. Applause thundered through the chamber like a breaking dam, sharp, uncontrollable, unstoppable. People stood without meaning to clapping, as if history itself had just taken a breath. The sound filled every corner, bouncing off the marble walls. The committee chair banged the gavel again and again, shouting, "Order, order, please." But no one listened. For the first time all day, the tension broke, not with anger, but with awe. Melania sat frozen, her face pale under the harsh lights. Then slowly she bowed her head, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control. "I request a recess," she said softly, eyes fixed on her papers. The chair didn't hesitate. "Request denied," he replied firmly. Cameras caught every second of it, the fall of power, the silence that followed. Jasmine stayed seated, hands folded calmly on the table. She didn't smile, didn't speak. Her gaze lifted to the giant screen where her mother's image glowed in black and white. Pride shimmered quietly in her eyes, not victory, but reverence. Across America, living rooms fell silent. Viewers leaned forward, tears rolling as they realized they weren't just watching a hearing. They were watching a legacy reclaim its name. The room was still humming from the echoes of applause when Jasmine rose once more. The air felt heavier now, charged with something quieter but deeper. She didn't hold a folder this time, only a small yellowed envelope, its edges frayed, the seal broken years ago. Her voice trembled slightly at first, then steadied into a firm, deliberate rhythm. "There's something I've never shared before," she said. "Something my mother kept hidden her whole life, a letter she received but never spoke about." The chamber fell silent again, tighter than ever. Every camera leaned in. Every heartbeat seemed to sink to hers. She unfolded the letter carefully, the paper thin as memory. The words were typed in the crisp official font of the 1970s, topped with the golden header, "The White House, Washington, D.C." Her fingers traced the first line before she began to read. "To Mrs. Sarah Crockett," she said softly, "whose courage during the bicentennial ceremony upheld not only our flag, but our nation's dignity." A shiver went through the crowd. Jasmine's voice grew stronger. "Your quiet strength reminded us that patriotism is not about fame, but about heart. America thanks you. Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States." A low murmur swept through the room. The cameras clicked wildly, capturing the trembling page beneath the soft glow of the overhead lights. The presidential seal was faint but unmistakable. The bald eagle embossed in gold, the ink faded but defiant against time. A senator whispered, "Is that real?" Jasmine nodded once. "It is. It came from the White House in 1976. But it was never made public. It stayed in a drawer for nearly 50 years until I found it after my mother passed." The statement landed like a thunderclap in slow motion. Several older lawmakers exchanged stunned glances. A few reporters lowered their cameras to move to speak. On the big screen behind her, the black and white photo of her mother still glowed, now paired with the image of that letter side by side, a woman's hands holding a rope, and a president's words honoring her for it. Melania stared at the document as though the letters themselves accused her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The foundation of her poise began to crack. Her painted calm couldn't withstand the truth written in history's own ink. Jasmine's eyes never left the letter. "So yes, Mrs. Trump," she said, voice low but razor sharp. "My mother's name was known once. You just chose to forget it." No one clapped this time. No one dared. The silence was absolute, the kind that follows a revelation, not a speech. Jasmine folded the letter again gently, reverently, and laid it on the table like a relic returning to light. The camera lingered on the seal, faded gold against old paper, a silent witness that the forgotten had just been remembered. The room hadn't moved for nearly a minute. No sound, no whispers, only the hum of the lights above, and the faint static of cameras still recording. Then Jasmine stepped forward. The motion was slow but full of purpose, her heels echoing across the polished floor like distant thunder. She reached the microphone, her hands steady, her shoulders unshaken. Her voice cut through the air, clear and unflinching. "The mother you insulted," she said, each word sharp and deliberate, "was the one who kept America's flag standing tall. And today I'm doing the same for the truth." The line hit the room like an explosion, muffled in velvet quiet, but devastating. Melania's face went pale. For a moment she seemed to forget where she was. Then with a sudden rustle of fabric, she pushed back her chair and stood eyes glinting with panic. "This is over," she muttered under her breath, ready to walk out. But before she could move another inch, the deep voice of the committee chair cut through the tension. "Mrs. Trump," he said firmly, "you will remain seated until the session is adjourned." The gavel struck once. The sound was final, echoing across the hall. Melania froze. The defiance in her posture faded into silence. She lowered herself back into the chair, hands gripping the edge of the table, her diamond ring trembling under the harsh lights. Across from her, Jasmine stood motionless, a figure of resolve, framed by the glare of every camera. The light caught her face, illuminating the calm intensity in her eyes. She looked almost unreal, not angry, not triumphant, just steady. Behind her, the giant screen still showed the photograph and the presidential letters side by side, glowing like two beacons of proof. The contrast was cinematic, light against shadow, truth against pretense. Jasmine stood beneath a wash of white light, her skin gleaming, her expression proud but calm. Melania, by contrast, was swallowed by shadow. Her once perfect composure had collapsed into something fragile and small. The camera panned slowly between them, capturing the image that would soon replay on every news network in America. One woman rising from history, another sinking under the weight of it. Then the chair lifted the microphone and spoke, his voice heavy but resolute. "The committee finds that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has presented verified historical evidence. The accusation of disrespect is without basis. In fact, she has revealed an essential part of our nation's legacy." His words carried like the closing line of a verdict, not shouted but carved into the air. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber remained frozen. Then the sound began. One clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the hearing room erupted into applause, thunderous, uncontrollable, unstoppable. The gavel struck in vain as the noise swelled, echoing off marble and glass. Jasmine didn't move. She only bowed her head slightly, eyes glistening as if honoring someone unseen. Under the blaze of the spotlights, Melania sat still, head lowered, the shadow around her deepening. Jasmine, standing in full light, looked not like a politician, but like a symbol reborn. The hearing was over, and the truth at last had won. The next morning, America woke to a storm of headlines. Every major newspaper carried the same photograph, a black and white image from 1976 showing a young black woman gripping the rope of a massive American flag, her body bent against the wind. The words above it blazed across the front page, "The unknown woman who held America's flag." It ran in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and even small-town papers from Kentucky to Oregon. Television anchors spoke with rare stillness. "That photo," one of them said quietly on air, "feels like the truth this country forgot to remember." By noon, every screen in America seemed to carry that image. News programs replayed the footage from the hearing beside the photograph, showing Jasmine Crockett standing before the nation as the story of her mother unfolded. Viewers sat motionless, unable to look away. The phones at television stations rang nonstop. People wanted to know more. Who was this woman? Why had no one ever said her name? And how could a country forget something so important? For Americans over 50, the photo hit like a flash of memory. They remembered the bicentennial celebration, the parades, the fireworks, the heat of July 4th, 1976. Many of them had watched the flag ceremony on television decades ago, never realizing what they were seeing. Now they remembered the sudden gust of wind that day, the flag nearly collapsing, and the figure who rushed forward to save it. One Vietnam veteran called a radio show and said, "I was there. I remember her. I didn't know her name then. I know it now, Sarah Crockett." Letters poured into newsrooms. Families gathered around dinner tables, speaking softly about the image as if it were a family memory rather than a national one. Within a week, schools began contacting Jasmine's office. Teachers asked for permission to use the photograph in the transcript of her testimony. History teachers rewrote their lesson plans overnight. In classrooms from Georgia to California, students watched the hearing clips and the image side by side. "This is what real courage looks like," one teacher told her students. Children wrote essays about the woman in the photograph and about what it means to hold something steady when everyone else lets go. Across the country, school assemblies ended with the same line Jasmine had spoken. "She kept the flag standing, and today we keep the truth." Commentators and columnists filled the airwaves. Morning shows called Jasmine the Congresswoman who made America remember. Editors described her as the woman who turned a political insult into a national awakening. On Sunday political panels, analysts debated how a single hearing could reshape a country's sense of identity. But beyond the politics, ordinary citizens felt something more personal, a sense of quiet pride that a forgotten woman had finally been seen. Historians moved quickly. A team from Howard University, joined by scholars from Harvard and Georgetown, announced a national research effort titled Hidden Hands of America. Their goal was to uncover the names and stories of the workers, cleaners, and laborers who had built and sustained the country, but were never recorded in history books. Dr. Richard Ellison, the historian who had testified at the hearing, spoke again at a press conference. Every great symbol, he said, was once held by someone whose name we never learned. It's time we learn them. His words spread across newsrooms and lecture halls. Museums began planning new exhibits. The Smithsonian declared it would feature a new gallery dedicated to unsung heroes of the bicentennial era. The reaction spread far beyond Washington. Families across America began opening old boxes, searching through attics for photos, letters, and certificates. People discovered forgotten documents showing their grandparents working in shipyards, hospitals, and parades, small acts of service that had gone unrecognized. Community centers hosted story nights where elders spoke about the jobs they had done and the pride they still carried. One woman from Cleveland held up a faded photograph of her grandmother and said she cleaned City Hall for 40 years. Maybe she held something together too. The hearing had started a wave of remembrance that rippled through every state. In Congress, something rare happened. A bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced a resolution to formally recognize the women of the 1976 bicentennial flag ceremony. Jasmine didn't sponsor it herself. She stayed silent as others took the floor. The resolution passed with overwhelming support. The text read, "In recognition of Sarah Crockett and her peers, whose steadfast courage embodied the highest spirit of American patriotism." The moment drew a standing ovation on both sides of the chamber. Even the speaker wiped his eyes as he read the vote aloud. The world took notice. International outlets ran the story for days. The BBC called it a quiet revolution in American memory. Frances Lemon wrote, "A daughter restored the honor her country forgot." In Japan, television commentators described it as a lesson in humility for every democracy. Newspapers in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa printed the photo beside their own flags, describing Sarah Crockett as a symbol of dignity and endurance. Across continents, the image became shorthand for unseen courage, the small act that carries a nation's weight. Back in the United States, the photograph transformed into an emblem of unity. Framed prints appeared in libraries and schools. Churches displayed it near their pulpits. Veterans associations carried banners bearing Sarah Crockett's name in Independence Day parades. For the first time, her story joined the ranks of national folklore, the tale of the woman who refused to let the flag fall. When journalists asked Jasmine what the recognition meant to her, she replied simply, "It means my mother finally came home." The image also began appearing in unexpected places, painted on murals, printed on postage stamps, projected on buildings during civic events. City councils across the country voted to dedicate small parks or memorial plaques to the flag keepers of 1976. Each ceremony ended the same way: a crowd standing under the stars' flags, fluttering a moment of silence for the people who worked unseen. International leaders mentioned the story in speeches about democracy, and a European ambassador said, "When nations forget who held their flags, they forget why they fly them." The quote circled the globe. What had begun as a tense congressional hearing had become a cultural reckoning. And through it all, the image endured: a woman gripping a rope in a storm, the flag straining above her, the wind in her hair. Beside that photograph, now often printed in color, another image began to appear. Jasmine Crockett standing in the hearing room, eyes steady under the glare of the lights. 2 generations, 1 legacy. The daughter holding the truth as firmly as the mother had held the flag. By the end of the month, Americans no longer referred to the photograph as the unknown woman. They called it what it truly was: the flag that never fell. And in every retelling, the name Sarah Crockett was spoken not with pity, but with pride. The months that followed marked a quiet revolution. What began as a congressional hearing had turned into a movement that reshaped the country's sense of pride. Across America, classrooms, churches, and community halls carried the same message printed on posters and banners. No job is menial, only contributions forgotten. It appeared on billboards, along highways, on murals in city squares, on the walls of public schools. It wasn't a slogan born from marketing, it was born from rediscovery, the simple truth that dignity doesn't depend on title but on effort. The campaign grew beyond anyone's expectation. Universities held seminars titled Unsung Hands, Unseen Heroes. Labor unions adopted the phrase as a reminder of their members' worth. Talk shows invited janitors, nurses, and street cleaners to share their stories. One woman from Chicago said through tears, "My grandmother used to clean classrooms. She always said she wasn't important. Now my daughter says she's a part of history." The audience stood and applauded until the host had to pause the show. It was as if an invisible layer of shame that had hung over ordinary work for generations was finally being peeled away. Everywhere, teachers told their students about the woman who held the flag. In elementary schools, children drew pictures of her, a small figure holding a rope hair whipping in the wind. In high schools, students debated what it means to serve without recognition. One ninth grader wrote in his essay, "She didn't stand in front of cameras. She stood in front of the storm." The essay was read aloud during a televised education summit, and the audience, educators, officials, and veterans fell silent. For the first time in years, civic education didn't feel abstract or forced. It felt real, human, alive. Soon, museums collaborated with local governments to build small memorials. Dozens of states passed resolutions funding monuments to honor the women of the bicentennial flag ceremony. They were not towering statues, but simple, graceful structures, bronze figures pulling a rope together, surrounded by flags. Each monument bore a plaque engraved with the same line. They kept the flag standing when the wind rose. At each unveiling, crowds gathered, families with children, elderly, veterans, workers in their uniforms. The national anthem played, but people sang it differently now, slower, deeper, with an understanding that patriotism isn't about perfection, but endurance. In Washington, a replica of the original 1976 flag was raised in front of the Capitol during a national broadcast. Jasmine Crockett was invited to deliver a few words. She walked up to the podium not in designer clothes or political grandeur, but in a simple navy dress, her mother's old locket around her neck. She looked out at the crowd, tens of thousands gathered under the same sky where her mother once stood. Her voice carried softly but firmly. "My mother didn't hold that flag because someone told her to. She held it because she believed it belonged to everyone. Today, we do the same with the truth." The applause rolled through the crowd like waves. Reporters later wrote that in that moment, the air felt lighter, as if the country itself had exhaled. News networks broadcast the event live. Across living rooms and community centers, people watched Jasmine's speech and the flag being raised again. In small towns, bells rang. In classrooms, teachers paused lessons so students could witness the moment. It wasn't just a political celebration, it was a moral one. When the flag reached full height, a gust of wind swept through the crowd, strong enough to make everyone look up. The flag fluttered fiercely, sunlight cutting through the fabric, and for a split second it looked almost like the photograph come to life. As the nation moved forward, Jasmine became something larger than a lawmaker. She became a symbol not of defiance, but of connection, a living bridge between the past and the present. People began calling her the keeper of the thread, the red thread that tied her mother's act of courage to her own. Her office was flooded with letters from across the country. Some were from children who said they wanted to grow up to be like the lady who spoke for her mom. Others came from elders who thanked her for reminding them that worth doesn't expire with time. Jasmine read everyone, placing the most moving ones into a box labeled legacy. Yet amid all the praise, she never forgot where the story began in silence. She often told reporters, "My mother didn't need applause. She just needed the truth to stand." Her humility disarmed even her critics. In interviews, she refused to take credit, saying, "All I did was show what was already there." That quiet grace made her more beloved than any speech ever could. In the following months, the Library of Congress announced a new exhibit, Sarah Crockett and the Women of the Bicentennial. Inside, visitors could see the original photograph, the National Archives document, and the presidential letter signed by Gerald Ford. A glass case displayed Sarah's rope, the one she had held that day, frayed but intact. The exhibit became one of the most visited in Washington. Tourists stood before it with tears in their eyes, whispering she really did it. Then came the final tribute. A group of artists collaborated with the Smithsonian to create a massive digital installation. It projected the 1976 photograph onto the walls of the rotunda, fading slowly into a modern image of Jasmine standing in Congress. The transition was seamless, mother to daughter, past to present. When the light reached its brightest point, the flag on the screen began to move, rippling as if caught in a real wind. Music swelled, a slow orchestral version of America the Beautiful. No narration, no speeches. Just the image of two women bound by courage, holding the same invisible line between history and hope. When the lights came up, no one spoke for several seconds. Then applause erupted, not the polite applause of ceremony, but the kind that rises from somewhere deep, almost sacred. Journalists described it as the sound of a nation remembering itself. And so the story came full circle. Jasmine stood under the dome of the Capitol as the crowd rose to its feet. On the screen behind her, her mother's face appeared one last time, young, fierce, defiant against the wind. The flag she once held fluttered again, larger than life. The image shifted slowly, dissolving into Jasmine's own reflection, standing beneath it. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The lights dimmed. The last frame lingered, the flag in full motion, the mother and daughter joined in light. Around them, the air shimmered with quiet reverence. It wasn't about victory anymore. It was about continuity, the unbroken act of holding steady in the storm. And as the cameras pulled back, showing the vast hall bathed in white and red, the voice of the narrator, calm, almost whispering, carried the story's final breath. She held the flag so it wouldn't fall. Her daughter held the truth so it wouldn't fade. Together, they proved that what stands in the light stands forever. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.